You're standing in the inner courtyard of Akbar's palace in Lahore, 1599. The air is thick with jasmine and impending horror. Before you, masons are laying bricks across a doorway, sealing a young woman inside a chamber while she is still alive. Her name is Anarkali Pomegranate Blossom, and she is watching them work. She doesn't scream, she doesn't beg. She simply stands in the center of the room, dressed in white, her hands trembling, watching the light disappear brick by brick. You can see her through the narrowing gap. Her eyes meet yours for just a moment before another brick slides into place. Inside that room is the woman Prince Saleem loved more than his throne, more than his life, more than his father's approval. And his father, Emperor Akbar, is making sure Saleem hears every brick being laid. Before we go any further, there's something you need to understand about Anarkali's death. Everything you think you know about it is wrapped in poetry, films, and centuries of romantic legend. The beautiful story of the courtesan who loved a prince and died nobly for that love has been told 1,000 ways. The image of Anarkali as a tragic heroine who chose death over betraying her beloved is what sells cinema tickets and breaks hearts. But what actually happened inside that sealed chamber in Akbar's palace in 1599 was something far more cruel, far more calculated, and far more revealing about what happens when a father's power collides with a son's heart. This is not just a story about forbidden love. It is a story about a father who would rather bury his son's happiness alive than lose control. About an emperor so threatened by a dancer's influence that he turned execution into days of psychological torture. About a woman whose only crime was being loved by the wrong man and having no power to protect herself. The real question isn't whether Anarkali and Saleem loved each other. It's why Akbar needed her to die slowly, publicly, while his son listened to her being buried alive. If understanding how love becomes a weapon in the hands of those who want to destroy it matters to you, consider subscribing. This channel exists to tell the stories of people erased by power, the ones who loved and suffered while emperors wrote history. Let me show you who Anarkali really was and what happened during her final days alive. Our story begins not with death, but with a dance. The year is 1593, 6 years before the tomb. Akbar's court in Lahore is at its height. Musicians, poets, artists from across the empire gathered in the Devonikas, the hall of private audiences. Akbar sits on his throne, surrounded by his 9 jewels, the legendary advisors and artists who made his court famous. His son, Prince Saleem, 24 years old, restless, hungry for his father's throne but forced to wait, sits nearby. The entertainment begins. A young woman enters. Her name is Anarkali. Some accounts say she was Persian, brought to court as a gift. Others claim she was born in Lahore, the daughter of a courtesan, trained from childhood in music and dance. What we know from multiple sources, including the court chronicler Badorni, is that she was extraordinarily beautiful and that her dance that night changed everything. She moved like poetry, they said. Her voice when she sang was honey and heartbreak. Prince Saleem, who had seen hundreds of court dancers, who had been offered the daughters of kings, who could have any woman in the empire, could not look away. According to legend preserved in Persian texts and later Urdu poetry, their eyes met during the performance. Just once, a glance that lasted seconds. But in that glance, Saleem saw something he had never seen before. Not submission, not performance, not the careful deference every woman in the palace showed him. He saw her, and she saw him, not as prince and dancer, but as 2 people trapped in a court where everything was politics and nothing was real. That moment, whether it happened exactly as the poets describe or has been romanticized over centuries, was the beginning of an obsession that would end in a tomb. Saleem began attending every performance where Anarkali danced. He requested her specifically for private gatherings. He sent gifts, jewels, silks, poems written in his own hand. At first, according to accounts, Anarkali was terrified. She knew the danger. A court dancer who attracted a prince's attention was either elevated or destroyed. and the difference depended entirely on the emperor's mood. She tried to refuse the gifts. She tried to maintain distance. But Saleem was relentless. And somewhere in that relentless pursuit, something shifted. She fell in love with him too. Their romance, if we can call it that, was conducted in stolen moments. After performances, in gardens at night, in corners of the palace where servants looked away. They had no privacy. Royal courts don't allow privacy, but they created the illusion of it. Saleem promised her everything. Marriage, status, a life beyond the court. He promised to make her a princess, to legitimize their love, to defy anyone who opposed them. And Anarkali, whether foolishly or bravely, believed him. Think about the psychology of that moment. A woman with nothing, promised everything by a man who had everything except freedom. A prince who had never been denied anything, suddenly denied the one thing he actually wanted. Both of them trapped in a system neither could control, trying to carve out something real in a world built on performance. For months, possibly years, they managed to hide the depth of their relationship. But in a royal court, nothing stays hidden. Servants talk, guards notice patterns, rivals collect information. By 1598, rumors were spreading through Akbar's court like poison. The crown prince is obsessed with a dancer. He speaks of marriage. He neglects his duties. He defies protocols. And the rumors eventually reached the one person who could not ignore them. Emperor Akbar. Akbar was not just any father. He was Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, third Mughal emperor, conqueror of most of the Indian subcontinent, architect of an empire that stretched from Afghanistan to Bengal. He had taken the throne at 13 after his father Humayun's death, fought off rivals, crushed rebellions, expanded territories his grandfather, Babur, had only dreamed of. He had built a syncretic court culture, married Rajput princesses to secure alliances, commissioned the Fatehpur Sikri palace complex, patronized artists and theologians from every religion. History remembers him as Akbar the Great. But greatness in empire is measured by control, and Akbar controlled everything. His court, his nobles, his sons, everything. Saleem was his eldest surviving son, the designated heir. Akbar had already lost children's sons who died young, daughters married off for alliances. Saleem was the future of the dynasty, and dynasties are not built on love. They are built on strategic marriages, political alliances, heirs who understand that personal desire is always subordinate to imperial necessity. Akbar himself had multiple wives, each marriage calculated for political advantage. He had married Rajput princesses, Muslim noblewomen, formed alliances through bedchambers and birth chambers. This was how empire worked. Marriage was treaty. Children were investments. Love was irrelevant. When Akbar first heard the rumors about Saleem and Anarkali, he dismissed them. A prince having an affair with a court dancer was not scandalous. It was expected. Royal men took concubines, kept dancers, fathered children outside official marriages. The system accommodated this. What the system could not accommodate was marriage. Could not accommodate a prince elevating a dancer to official wife, giving her status, legitimacy, political standing. That crossed a line. That threatened the entire architecture of alliance and hierarchy that held the empire together. According to Badani's chronicle, Akbar summoned Saleem in early 1599. The conversation was private, but its substance can be reconstructed from later events and court records. Akbar likely began with reason. Saleem, you are crown prince. Your marriage is not yours to decide. Your wife will be chosen for political value, Rajput princess, a Persian noblewoman, someone whose family brings armies, territory, legitimacy. This dancer brings nothing. She is entertainment, property. You can keep her as a concubine if you wish, but you cannot marry her. You cannot give her status. You cannot let this obsession threaten your future. Saleem refused. Not just refused, but escalated. According to fragments preserved in later Mughal histories, possibly embellished but consistent across sources, Saleem told his father he would rather renounce the throne than give up Anarkali, that he loved her, that she was the only genuine thing in his life, the only person who saw him as human rather than prince, that he would marry her with or without permission. Think about what that meant to Akbar, his heir, his investment, his legacy, threatening to throw it all away for a woman with no family, no wealth, no political value, a woman who was legally property of the court. This was not just defiance, this was madness. Akbar's first response was separation. If Saleem could not see Anarkali, the obsession would fade. Memory would cool. Reality would reassert itself. So, in February 1599, Anarkali was removed from court. She was sent to a distant estate outside Lahore, kept under guard, forbidden from any contact with the prince. For 3 weeks, Saleem did not see her, and for 3 weeks, he deteriorated. He stopped attending court functions, stopped eating properly, stopped engaging with his duties. His friends, according to contemporary accounts, reported that he spoke of nothing but Anarkali, that he was planning to flee the palace, to find her, to run away together. That separation had not killed the obsession, had intensified it into something desperate and irrational. So Akbar tried a different strategy: distraction through marriage. If Saleem was married to someone appropriate, someone beautiful, someone politically valuable, perhaps that would redirect his attention. In March 1599, Saleem was married to a Rajput princess, the daughter of Raja Bhagwant Das of Amber. It was a politically brilliant match. The marriage secured Rajput loyalty, strengthened existing alliances, produced the heirs the dynasty needed. The wedding was magnificent days of celebration, expensive gifts, poets composing verses about the union of Mughal power and Rajput honor. But Saleem went through the ceremonies like a ghost. He performed his duties. He smiled when required. And the night after the wedding, he sent a message to the estate where Anarkali was being held. "Wait for me, I will come for you." That message was intercepted. Akbar's spies were everywhere, and a prince's secret communications were never truly secret. When Akbar learned that marriage had not solved the problem, that Saleem was still plotting to reach Anarkali, still prioritizing a dancer over a princess, still defying imperial logic, something in him shifted. This was no longer a youthful obsession that would fade. This was a fundamental challenge to authority. If Saleem could defy his emperor father over a woman, what else would he defy? When would he stop? How could Akbar maintain control over his empire if he could not control his own son? By April 1599, Akbar made his decision. Anarkali would not be exiled further. She would not be married off to some distant noble. She would not disappear quietly into a forgotten corner of the empire. She would be eliminated. But the elimination had to serve a purpose beyond her death. It had to break Saleem's defiance. It had to send a message to every noble, every courtier, every potential rival that challenged the emperor's authority. It had to be public, theatrical, unforgettable, and it had to be cruel enough that Saleem would never again prioritize love over duty. Akbar chose immune, the ancient Persian method of execution where the condemned is sealed alive inside a chamber and left to die slowly. It was not common in Mughal India, but Akbar would have known of it from Persian histories, from Central Asian traditions that flowed through the Timurid lineage his family descended from. The symbolism was perfect. The victim was not beheaded, not hung, not granted the dignity of quick death. They were erased, sealed away, made to disappear while still breathing. And the construction itself became spectacle days of bricklaying, visible to the court, audible to anyone nearby, a slow motion execution that allowed everyone to understand exactly what was happening. In late August 1599, Anarkali was brought back to the palace, not to the women's quarters, not to the performance halls where she had danced, to a small chamber in the inner courtyard, a room approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, stone floor, high ceiling, one wooden door, one small window near the top of the wall. It had been used for storage. Now it would become her tomb. She was told nothing. No charges were read, no sentence pronounced. She was simply placed in the room, given water, and left alone. The door was locked from outside. Guards were posted, and she waited, terrified, not knowing what was coming, but knowing it would be terrible. According to accounts preserved in Persian texts, possibly the Tusakai Jahangiri, though its authenticity regarding this incident is disputed. Anarkali spent the first night calling for Saleem, shouting his name through the small window, begging guards to carry messages, promising anything: silence, exile, renunciation if they would just tell the prince where she was. The guards said nothing. They had orders. No one was to speak to her. No one was to acknowledge her. She was already becoming a ghost. The next morning, she heard sounds outside, hammering, voices, the scrape of tools against stone. She pressed her face to the narrow window and saw them, masons, carrying bricks, mixing mortar, building scaffolding, preparing to wall her in. Think about that moment. The horror of understanding. Not being told, but seeing. Watching workers prepare the instruments of your death, while you stand helpless inside a room that is about to become your grave. Anarkali began screaming, then, according to accounts, not words, just raw terror. She threw herself against the door, clawed at the stone walls, begged anyone who could hear to stop this, to tell Saleem to do something. But the masons continued their work methodically, professionally. This was a job. Orders from the emperor. They were being paid to build a tomb around a living woman, and they would do it properly. Around midday on September 1st, the door to the chamber opened. Akbar's chief guard entered, accompanied by 2 court officials. One of them carried a scroll. They read it aloud to Anarkali, who had collapsed against the far wall, exhausted from screaming. Anarkali, dancer of the royal court. You have corrupted the mind of Crown Prince Saleem through seduction and possibly witchcraft. You have caused discord between father and son. You have endangered the succession and stability of the empire. Emperor Akbar, in his infinite mercy, offers you this one opportunity. Confess publicly that you used forbidden arts to ensnare the prince. Renounce any claim to his affection. Swear that you will never see him or speak his name again. Do this, and you will be exiled to a distant province where you may live out your days. Refuse, and the chamber will be sealed with you inside until death. The offer was designed to destroy her, even if she accepted it. If Anarkali confessed to witchcraft, she would be publicly branded as a manipulator. Saleem could be told his love was manufactured, his emotions controlled by dark arts. His obsession could be reframed as victimhood, his defiance as temporary madness induced by her sorcery. Akbar would get what he needed. Saleem freed from the spell, the succession secured, the problem solved. And Anarkali would live, technically, but branded forever as a witch, exiled, alone, her name destroyed, her love erased from history as trickery rather than truth. But confessing would also mean betraying everything she and Saleem had shared. Every whispered promise, every stolen moment, every time he had looked at her and seen a person rather than property. If she confessed to manipulation, she would be confirming what Akbar wanted everyone to believe, that a dancer could never genuinely love a prince, that their connection was performance, that power and status were the only real currencies, and love was just another transaction. She would be validating the system that made her powerless in the first place. According to the romantic versions of this story, preserved in Urdu poetry and later dramatized in films, Anarkali's response was immediate and defiant. I loved him. That is not witchcraft. That is not a crime. I will not lie to save my life. Other accounts suggest she simply remained silent, refusing to speak at all, letting her silence be her answer. Still others claim, she said, tell Saleem I kept my promise. Tell him I never betrayed what we had. The specific words may vary across retellings, but the substance is consistent. She refused. She chose death over the lie. She chose the tomb over the confession. The officials left. The door closed. And the next morning, September 2nd, the masons entered the chamber. They carried their tools, their bricks, their buckets of mortar. They brought wooden planks to create a working platform, and they began at the door. Anarkali was made to stand in the center of the room and watch. Her hands were not bound, there was no need. She had nowhere to go, but 2 guards stood with her to ensure she did not interfere with the work. The masons began laying bricks across the doorway. 1 brick, mortar, another brick, mortar, slowly, methodically, building a wall that would seal her inside forever. The work took hours. This was intentional. Akbar had given explicit instructions. Do not rush. Make sure she sees every brick. Make sure she understands that at any moment she could stop this by calling out her confession. That every brick is her choice. That she is building her own tomb through stubbornness. The psychological torture was precise. Each brick was a countdown. Each hour that passed was an opportunity refused. And Anarkali stood there, watching the doorway disappear behind stone, watching the light from the corridor slowly being blocked section by section, knowing that rescue was not coming. Because Saleem did not know. He had been confined to his quarters in another wing of the palace. Not imprisoned, that would create scandal, but restricted. Guards at his doors. Told his father wished to discuss important matters, but was busy with state business. Told to wait, to be patient. Saleem knew something was wrong. He could feel it, but he did not know what. Did not know that in the inner courtyard, the woman he loved was watching herself being buried alive. By the time the door was fully sealed, late in the afternoon on September 2nd, Anarkali was alone in dim light. The door had become a solid brick wall, but the small window near the ceiling was still open. She could still breathe. She could still see fragments of sky. And she could still hope, impossibly, that something would change. That night, Anarkali was alone with her despair. The chamber was not completely dark. Moonlight filtered through the window opening, casting pale shadows on the stone floor. But the air was already changing, heavier, staler. The ventilation was minimal, just the small window and microscopic gaps between bricks. She could hear the palace beyond the walls. Distant voices, footsteps, music from somewhere far away. The normal sounds of a court functioning while she suffocated inside it. According to later accounts, possibly romanticized but consistent across Persian and Urdu sources, she sang that night, quietly, to herself. The same songs she had performed when Saleem first saw her. As if singing could summon him. As if her voice could reach through stone and make him understand where she was. But Saleem heard nothing. He was 3 corridors away, pacing his chambers, demanding answers from guards who said nothing, growing more agitated with each hour. His friends later reported that he knew something terrible was happening. He felt it, but he was trapped by protocol, by hierarchy, by the same system that was killing Anarkali. A prince does not break down his father's doors. A son does not accuse his emperor of crimes. Even suspicion must wait for permission to be spoken. So Saleem waited, helpless, while the woman he loved counted her remaining hours. September 3rd, dawn. The masons returned. This time they brought ladders and scaffolding to reach the high window. Anarkali watched them set up equipment outside. She pressed her face to the opening, breathing the outside air, begging them to stop. Please, please, I have family. I have a mother. Someone tell the prince. Someone tell him where I am. The masons worked in silence. They had families too. They needed their wages. Orders from an emperor were not negotiable. They began laying bricks across the window opening. 1 brick at a time, the square of light getting smaller, smaller. The last connection to the outside world being sealed brick by brick. Anarkali screamed. Not words anymore, just animal terror. The sound echoed through the courtyard, and servants in nearby buildings stopped their work to listen. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone knew who was inside. And everyone understood that this was a message meant for them as much as for the woman dying inside. This is what happens when you threaten imperial authority. This is what happens when someone the emperor once removed exists in his space. This is how completely you can be erased. The window was sealed by mid-morning. The chamber went dark. Not completely, thin cracks between bricks still admitted threads of light, but dark enough that Anarkali could no longer see clearly. Dark enough that time became impossible to measure. Dark enough that hope became impossible to sustain. By September 4th, Anarkali had been in the sealed chamber for 3 days. No food had been provided. 1 cup of water had been passed through a small gap before the window was completely sealed, just enough to prolong the process, not enough to sustain her. Dehydration was beginning its work. Thirst that felt like swallowing sand. Headaches, dizziness, the body starting to shut down, non-essential functions to conserve what little fluid remained. According to medical knowledge, a human can survive 3 to 5 days without water, depending on conditions. Akbar's engineers knew this. They were timing her death. But the physical torture was only half the design. The psychological destruction was the real purpose. Think about what those days were like inside that chamber. Alone in near darkness. No sound except your own breathing. No way to measure time except the slow deterioration of your body. Hoping every noise outside might be rescued. Every footstep might be Saleem coming to save you. But the footsteps always pass by. The voices never call your name. And slowly, hour by hour, you understand that no one is coming. That you are going to die here. That the prince you loved either does unknow or help, or has been convinced not to try. On September 5th, the masons returned one final time. They reinforced the walls with a second layer of bricks, making them thicker, stronger, more permanent. They sealed the remaining cracks where light had been entering. They worked from outside the chamber. Now inside was sealed completely. Their work was meticulous, professional. When they finished, the chamber was nearly soundproof. A woman could scream inside and no one more than a few feet away would hear. She could die and her death would be silent, invisible, erased. The tomb was complete. All that remained was for the dying to finish. While the masons worked, Saleem finally broke. 3 days of confinement, 3 days of growing dread, 3 days of being told to wait, to be patient, to trust his father. Something snapped. According to court records preserved by Badani, Saleem forced his way past the guards at his quarters and stormed through the palace, demanding to see Akbar, demanding to know where Anarkali was, demanding answers. He was intercepted by his father's advisors, who tried to calm him, tried to redirect him, but Saleem would not be calmed. He began shouting Anarkali's name through the palace corridors. Servants scattered, courtiers pretended not to hear. And Akbar finally emerged from the council chamber where he had been conducting business as if nothing unusual was happening. The confrontation between father and son happened in one of the palace's inner gardens. Private enough that most details were not recorded, but public enough that fragments reached chroniclers through witnesses. Akbar's opening line, according to Badana's account, was cold precision. The woman who corrupted your mind is being dealt with. You need not concern yourself. Saleem demanded to know what that meant. Demanded to see her. Demanded his father release her immediately. Akbar's response was the truth, delivered with the same administrative calm he used to discuss tax revenues or military campaigns. She was given a choice: confess and live in exile. Refuse and be sealed in a chamber until death. She refused. She is sealed. In a few days, the problem will be resolved. Akbar's response was the final cruelty. If you love her so much, go to her. Stand outside the chamber and call her name. See if she answers. See if your love can break through brick and stone. See if anything you feel matters more than what I have decided. It was not permission, it was mockery, a taunt, an invitation to witness his own powerlessness. But Saleem took it. He ran, through corridors, downstairs, into the inner courtyard where the sealed chamber stood. And there it was. A small building with thick brick walls, recently constructed, mortar still fresh, no door visible, no windows, just solid stone with a tomb-like finality. Saleem pressed himself against the wall, screamed her name, Anarkali, Anarkali, I'm here, please, answer me. Inside the chamber, Anarkali heard him. After days of silence, days of abandonment, days of believing he didn't know or didn't care, she heard his voice. Muffled through the thick walls, barely audible, but unmistakably him. She dragged herself from the floor where she had collapsed weak from dehydration, dizzy from lack of air, but conscious enough to recognize the voice she had been waiting for. She screamed back, Saleem, Saleem, I'm here, please, please get me out. But the walls were too thick. He heard nothing. He screamed again. She screamed again. Two people separated by 3 feet of brick and mortar, shouting at walls that swallowed their voices, close enough to touch if the stone wasn't there, utterly unreachable. According to later accounts from servants who witnessed this scene, Saleem clawed at the bricks with his bare hands, tried to tear them apart with his fingers. His hands bled. Guards watched but did not intervene. They had no orders to stop him, only to ensure he did not successfully breach the wall. After an hour of this futile desperation, Saleem collapsed against the tomb, weeping, still calling her name, still believing somehow his voice would reach her. Inside, Anarkali had stopped screaming. She had no strength left. She lay on the stone floor, listening to the muffled sounds from outside, knowing he was there, knowing he was trying, knowing it made no difference. This was Akbar's real execution. Not just killing Anarkali, forcing Saleem to fail to save her, making him witness his own powerlessness, breaking him completely. By evening, guards escorted Saleem back to his quarters. He did not resist. Something in him had broken. The energy, the defiance, the desperate hope, all of it drained away. He had seen the tomb. He had screamed himself hoarse against it. He had bled, trying to tear it apart. And the walls had not moved. Anarkali had not emerged. His love had changed nothing. That night, September 5th, Saleem lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. And for the first time since this ordeal began, he stopped fighting. Not because he accepted what was happening, but because he understood that acceptance was irrelevant. His father had all the power. He had none, and the woman he loved was dying while he breathed. Inside the tomb, Anarkali was entering her final stages. September 6th, 4 days without food, 3 days with minimal water, in a sealed chamber with limited oxygen. Her body was shutting down, kidneys failing, heart struggling, consciousness fading in and out. The thirst was unbearable, throat swollen, tongue thick, every breath painful. But worse than physical agony was the knowledge that Saleem had been there, that he had tried, that he had been so close she could hear his voice through stone, and that even his love, even his desperation, even his bloodied hands could not save her. She died knowing he tried, and she died knowing trying wasn't enough. The exact moment of Anarkali's death is not recorded. Historical accounts disagree on whether she died on September 6th, 7th, or 8th. What we know is that by September 8th, when Akbar ordered the chamber inspected, she was dead. The masons removed enough bricks to confirm death, then sealed it again. No body was removed. No burial ceremony performed. She was left inside the chamber that had become her tomb. Her body sealed in darkness, just as she had feared, just as Akbar had intended. This was erasure as punishment, not just death, but complete removal from the world. She would not have a grave her family could visit. She would not have prayers said over her properly. She would simply cease to exist, walled away like a mistake that needed hiding. Saleem was informed on September 9th, a simple message delivered by a court official. The matter is resolved. The woman is dead. Your father expects you to resume your duties. No apology, no acknowledgement of his suffering. Just administrative closure. A problem dealt with. Move forward. According to later historians, including references in the Tusukai Jahangiri, though their reliability regarding this incident remains disputed. Saleem did not speak for 3 days after receiving this news. He attended court functions like a ghost. He sat through meetings without hearing what was said. He looked at his father across council chambers and said nothing, but his eyes carried something that would eventually explode into open rebellion. But that rebellion was years away. In September 1599, Saleem was simply broken, and Akbar had achieved exactly what he intended. The dangerous obsession was eliminated. The woman who threatened the succession was gone. The heir had been taught a brutal lesson about the limits of his power and the reach of his father's. The court had witnessed what happened when someone challenged imperial authority. The machinery of absolute power had functioned perfectly, destroying everyone necessary to maintain control. One woman dead, one prince psychologically shattered, one emperor's authority reaffirmed. Empire always demands sacrifice, and those without power are always sacrificed first. In the days that followed, life at Akbar's court returned to normal. Audiences were held, petitions heard, music performed, business conducted. The sealed chamber in the inner courtyard remained. Akbar ordered it left standing. He did not explain why, but the reason was obvious to everyone who saw it. The tomb was a monument, a warning, a permanent architectural reminder that defiance had consequences. Courtiers walked past it daily on their way to administrative buildings. Servants passed it carrying supplies. Everyone in the palace knew what was inside, and everyone adjusted their behavior accordingly. This is how terror works most effectively, not through constant violence, but through visible monuments to past violence that make future violence unnecessary. The tomb stood for years. Some accounts suggest it remained throughout Akbar's lifetime, a ghostly presence in the palace complex that no one spoke of directly, but everyone remembered. After Akbar's death in 1605, Saleem took the throne as Emperor Jahangir. One of his first private actions, according to legend though not confirmed by solid historical evidence, was to visit the sealed chamber, to stand before the wall that had killed her, to place his hand on the bricks and finally, 6 years too late, say goodbye. Whether this happened or is romantic invention, we cannot know. What we do know is that Jahangir never mentioned Anarkali in his memoirs, never wrote her name in official documents, never acknowledged publicly that she existed. Ever heard a story so powerful it refuses to die, even when emperors try to bury it? Today, we re-diving into one of history's most tragic and enduring love stories, the tale of Anarkali and Prince Saleem. It's a story of a beautiful courtesan in the Mughal court who dared to love a prince, and an emperor, Akbar the Great, who couldn't allow it. But the most haunting part of this story isn't just the love or the tragedy, it's the silence. Prince Saleem, who later became Emperor Jahangir, wrote detailed memoirs about his life. He wrote about his conquests, his family, even his conflicts with his father, Akbar. But he never once wrote the name Anarkali. Was the pain too deep? Or was the shame of failing to save her too great? This silence speaks volumes. It's a void in the historical record that screams of a memory forcibly erased. But you can't erase a story like this. While Jahangir remained silent, the legend of Anarkali survived in whispers. It echoed in the songs of court musicians, the poems of courtiers who witnessed her fate, and the folklore carried by travelers across the land. The story spread far beyond the palace walls, evolving with each retelling, but the core always remained the same. A dancer, loved by a prince, buried alive by an emperor for the crime of that love. In the heart of Lahore, Pakistan, stands a tomb believed to be hers. This building has its own incredible story. As the Mughal Empire crumbled, the tomb fell into disrepair, but local tradition held firm this was Anarkali's final resting place. At some point, a heartbreaking inscription appeared on the sarcophagus. Written in Persian, "Ah, if I could behold the face of my beloved once more, I would thank God until the day of resurrection." Was it Jahangir secretly mourning his lost love? Or someone else, moved by her story? We may never know for sure, but someone wanted her to be remembered. Then came the British Empire. In 1849, they conquered Lahore and transformed this symbol of Mughal tragedy into something of their own. The tomb became St. James's Church. A cross was placed on the dome, pews were installed inside, and stained glass filled the windows. It's a bitter irony. A monument to one empire's cruelty was repurposed by another, each layering their power over the memory of a single woman. The British found the story fascinating, using it as proof of Oriental despotism to justify their own rule, all while conveniently ignoring their own forms of imperial violence. After Pakistan's independence in 1947, the building changed hands again. The church became the Punjab Record Office. Filing cabinets replaced the altar, and bureaucrats worked where worshippers once prayed. The tomb was endlessly recycled, its original purpose buried under layers of political change. It's the final indignity, not just to die, but to have your grave endlessly repurposed for others' needs. But here's the beautiful, defiant truth. While buildings can be altered and official records can be silenced, stories are much harder to kill. Even as the tomb served as a church and then an office, the people of Lahore never forgot. They still called it Anarkali's tomb. Couples left flowers at the gates. The cultural memory persisted, a quiet act of resistance against the powers that tried to erase it. This is how the powerless fight back, even after death, through stories that refuse to be sealed behind brick walls. In the 20th century, Anarkali's story exploded into popular culture. Books, plays, and especially films brought her legend to a global audience. The most famous of these is the 1960 epic Mughalism. This masterpiece of Indian cinema, with its lavish sets and unforgettable performances, defined how generations would see this story. Madhubala's portrayal of Anarkali was heartbreakingly beautiful and brave. The film's climax is iconic, Anarkali being walled up alive, brick by brick, as Prince Saleem screams her name, held back by guards. But the film made a crucial change to the story. It gave Anarkali a choice. She willingly walks to her death to save Saleem from his father's wrath. And in a secret act of mercy, the film shows Emperor Akbar allowing her to escape through a hidden tunnel, letting the world believe she died. This ending offers redemption and hope. It suggests that even an emperor's heart can be moved by love. It's a beautiful thought, but it obscures a harsher reality. If the original accounts are true, there was no secret escape. There was no last-minute mercy. There was just a woman, suffocating in darkness, dying alone for the crime of loving the wrong person. There was an emperor who chose absolute control over compassion. The romanticized version of the story is easier to bear, but it lets empire off the hook. It sanitizes the raw, systematic cruelty that likely took place. So, the legend of Anarkali leaves us with a profound question. Which story do we choose to remember? The one that offers comfort and redemption, or the one that forces us to confront the brutal reality of power? Her story, trapped between historical silence and cinematic romance, reminds us that memory itself is a battlefield. And sometimes, the most important stories are the ones that make us the most uncomfortable. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through history and legend. If you found this story as compelling as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. See you next time. This is how historical trauma gets sanitized. Not through erasure, the story is too powerful to erase, but through transformation. By turning execution into sacrifice, cruelty into tragic necessity, imperial violence into family drama. By focusing on Saleem's pain rather than Anarkali's terror. By making Akbar sympathetic, conflicted, human, when the historical evidence suggests he was simply efficient. By giving the story an ending we can bear rather than the ending that probably happened. We do this because the truth is too horrible. Because we need to believe that love matters even when power destroys it. Because we cannot accept that sometimes people die screaming in darkness and nothing redeems it. But what if we sit with that horror instead of transforming it? What if we acknowledge that Anarkali, if she existed, died without dignity, without mercy, without her death meaning anything except a lesson about power? What if we accept that Saleem's love for her, deep and genuine as it may have been, could not save her because love is not a currency that absolute power recognizes? What if we understand that Akbar was not tortured by this decision but simply pragmatic, solving a political problem with the tools available to emperors, walls, bricks, time, terror? What does that tell us about the world these people inhabited and the systems we inherited from them? It tells us that empire is incompatible with individual happiness, that systems built on absolute authority require the continuous sacrifice of those without power, that love, family, human connection, all the things we consider sacred, are subordinate to political necessity in imperial logic, that the powerless exist to be used, displayed, discarded, buried when convenient. Anarkali's story is not unique, it is representative. For every court dancer sealed in a tomb, there were thousands of peasants crushed by taxation, soldiers destroyed in wars, women married to strangers for alliances, children sacrificed to dynastic ambitions. Anarkali is simply the one whose story survived because a prince loved her. The others are nameless, and that is the final tragedy. We remember Anarkali not because her suffering was unique, but because Saleem's love made her visible. If she had just been a dancer who died quietly, poisoned or exiled or forgotten, we would not know her name. She matters in history only because her death served Akbar's purpose of breaking his son. Her suffering became meaningful only when it was useful to power. Even in death, even in memory, she exists primarily in relation to the men who controlled her, loved by a prince, killed by an emperor, remembered because their conflict made her death spectacular. This is how patriarchy and empire collaborate. Women's stories survive only when they serve male narratives. Their pain matters only when it impacts male power. So let's recenter this story one final time. Not as a love story, not as a family drama, but as the story of a woman named Anarkali who had no control over her fate from the moment she entered Akbar's court. She was property, entertainment, decorative function. When she attracted a prince's attention, she became a problem. When that problem needed solving, she became a method, Akbar's tool for teaching his son a lesson about submission. Her feelings, her desires, her fear, her suffering, none of it mattered to the system that killed her. She was killed not because she did anything wrong, but because her existence inconvenienced power. And that is not romance, that is murder. The question is why we keep retelling this story as romance. Why for centuries of poets, playwrights, filmmakers have transformed a woman's execution into beautiful tragedy. The answer is that we need these stories. We need to believe that love is powerful enough to challenge empire, even when empire wins. We need to believe that suffering can be meaningful, can be noble, can transcend the brutality that caused it. We need to believe that Anarkali chose her death rather than had it forced upon her. Because choice implies dignity and forced death implies helplessness, and we cannot bear to imagine ourselves helpless. So we transform her story. We give her agency she did not have. We make her suffering voluntary. We call it love. But what if, instead of romanticizing her death, we rage against it? What if instead of celebrating her sacrifice, we condemn the system that demanded it? What if instead of focusing on Saleem's broken heart, we focus on Akbar's cold calculation? What if we tell this story not as tragedy but as crime, and ask who should be held accountable? Akbar ordered her death, he is responsible. The guards who prevented Saleem from reaching her, they are complicit. The masons who laid the bricks, they participated. The courtiers who knew and said nothing, they enabled it. The system that made dancers, property, and emperors gods, that is the real criminal. Everyone who could have intervened and did not shares the guilt. This is what makes the story uncomfortable when told truthfully, because it implicates systems we still live within. Hierarchies of power, where the vulnerable are sacrificed to maintain stability. Economic structures where some people are disposable so others can prosper. Social systems where women exist primarily in relation to men, where their value is determined by male desire. where their suffering is romanticized rather than prevented. These are not ancient problems, they are current. Anarkali's story is for centuries old, but its mechanics are timeless. People are still sealed in metaphorical tombs for threatening the wrong power structures. People are still erased for being inconvenient. Power still destroys love when love threatens its interests. Stand in Lahore today. The building identified as Anarkali's tomb still stands in the Civil Secretariat complex, surrounded by modern city, traffic, office buildings. Access is difficult. You need government permission, have to navigate security, can only visit during limited hours. The building itself is unrecognizable from what it may have been in 1599, modified, rebuilt, repurposed so many times that whatever historical truth it contained is buried under layers of later construction. The walls that may have held Anarkali are covered now by plaster, paint, administrative modifications. The space where she died, if she died there, is now filled with filing cabinets and office furniture. But people still come. Not many. The location and restrictions make it difficult. But some, mostly local couples, young people in love who have heard the story and want to stand where Anarkali stood. They leave flowers outside the security fence. They take photographs. They hold hands and promise each other their love will be different, will survive, will not end in tragedy. They do not seem to realize that their presence is itself a form of resistance. That by remembering her, by refusing to let her story die, they are doing what Akbar tried to prevent. They are keeping Anarkali visible, making her matter, ensuring that her death was not complete erasure. This is the power of memory when it refuses to be controlled. Akbar sealed Anarkali in brick and mortar, tried to erase her from existence, forbade her name to be spoken. But for centuries later, people still speak her name, still tell her story, still argue about whether she existed, what she meant, whether her death was sacrifice or murder. The empire that killed her is gone. The dynasty that she threatened is extinct. The palace where she died is ruins and renovations. But her story survives. Imperfect, contested, romanticized beyond recognition, but surviving. And that survival is its own kind of victory over the power that tried to erase her. Was Anarkali a real person, or is she just a beautiful, tragic myth? For centuries, the story of the courtesan entombed alive for daring to love a prince has captured our imaginations. It's a tale of forbidden romance, imperial power, and ultimate sacrifice, set against the glittering backdrop of the Mughal Empire. But how much of it is actually true? Today, we're peeling back the layers of legend to find the historical truth, or lack thereof, behind one of South Asia's most enduring love stories. The legend, as most of us know it, goes something like this. A stunningly beautiful woman, Shafanisa, known by her title, Anarkali, meaning pomegranate blossom, served in the court of the great Mughal Emperor Akbar. His son, Prince Saleem, who would later become Emperor Jahangir, fell deeply in love with her. Their romance blossomed in secret, a dangerous game in a court where every glance was scrutinized. But their love was not destined to remain hidden. One day, Emperor Akbar caught Anarkali smiling at Saleem in a hall of mirrors. Enraged that a common courtesan would dare to have a relationship with the heir to the throne, and seeing it as a challenge to his authority, Akbar delivered a horrifying sentence. He ordered Anarkali to be buried alive within a brick wall. A helpless Saleem could only watch as his beloved was slowly entombed, a living monument to a father's wrath and an empire's rigid hierarchy. It's dramatic, it's heartbreaking, and it has inspired countless films, books, and plays, most famously the 1960 Bollywood epic, Mughalism. This version of the story is powerful, but when we turn to the official historical records of the Mughal era, we find a curious silence. There is absolutely no mention of anyone named Anarkali in the Akbarnama, the official chronicle of Akbar's reign, nor in Jahangir's own detailed memoirs, the two Sikai Jahangiri. You would think that an event as dramatic as the heir apparent's lover being executed in such a gruesome manner would warrant at least a footnote. But there's nothing. Jahangir wrote extensively about his life, his campaigns, his love for hunting, his family, and even the minute details of his court. Yet this supposed great love of his youth is completely absent. This historical void is the first major red flag for historians. It strongly suggests that the story, as we know it, did not happen. So, where did the story come from? The first written accounts of the Anarkali legend appear much later, not from Mughal court historians, but from European travelers. One of the earliest mentions comes from a British traveler named William Finch, who visited Lahore around 1611. Just a few years after Akbar's death, Finch recorded a story he heard about a tomb in Lahore belonging to one of Emperor Akbar's wives who was caught in an affair with her son Saleem. He claimed that Akbar had her entombed alive. Another traveler, Edward Terry, who was in India a few years after Finch, repeated a similar story. Notice the key differences here. These early European accounts mention an affair, but they described the woman as one of Akbar's wives, not a court dancer. This twists the narrative from a tragic romance into a tale of incest and betrayal, a far more scandalous accusation. It's possible that these travelers were simply repeating court gossip, sensational rumors that were never recorded in official documents. European audiences at the time had a huge appetite for exotic and dramatic stories from the Orient, and tales of harem, intrigue, and brutal emperors fit that bill perfectly. These stories might have been exaggerated or misunderstood, retellings of local bazaar gossip shaped to be more shocking and therefore more interesting to readers back home. So we have no contemporary Mughal evidence, and the first mentions are from foreigners repeating scandalous rumors. But what about the physical evidence? The so-called tomb of Anarkali in Lahore. This beautiful octagonal building is a real place, a masterpiece of early Mughal architecture. Today, it serves as an archive within the Punjab Secretariat complex. Inside, there is a marble cenotaph, intricately carved. An inscription on it gives two dates, 1599 and 1615. The first date is believed to be the year of the occupant's death, and the second is the year the tomb was completed. The cenotaph also bears a poignant Persian couplet: "If I could behold the face of my beloved once more, I would thank my God until the day of resurrection." Many have attributed this inscription to Prince Saleem, a lament for his lost love. This has been used as the strongest piece of evidence for the legend's authenticity. But here's the problem. The name on the tomb is not Anarkali. Historical analysis of the inscription suggests it refers to a Majnun Saleem Akbar, which translates to the profoundly loved of Saleem, son of Akbar. Many historians, like Abdullah Chutai, argue that the tomb actually belongs to one of Jahangir's beloved wives, perhaps a woman named Sayyiba-i-Jamal, who died around that time. The tomb was likely built by a grieving Jahangir for a legitimate wife, not a forbidden lover. The name Anarkali was probably attached to the tomb much later, as the legend grew and needed a physical anchor. The area around the tomb was once known as the Anarkali Bazaar, and it's plausible the name of the marketplace simply became associated with the anonymous tomb within it. So, if the historical records are silent and the physical evidence is ambiguous at best, why has the Anarkali story not only survived but thrived? The answer lies in its cultural power. The legend of Anarkali versus Akbar is not just a love story. It's a powerful allegory for the conflict between personal desire and state duty, between love and power, and between a younger generation and an older, more rigid authority. In the character of Anarkali, we see a woman who, despite her low social standing, dares to challenge the most powerful man in the empire, not with weapons, but with love. She represents a form of rebellion that is deeply personal yet has profound political implications. For Prince Saleem, his love for Anarkali symbolizes his own struggle against his formidable father. The Mughal court was a place of intense power dynamics, and the relationship between Akbar and Saleem was notoriously complex and often strained. The Anarkali story provides a romanticized, dramatic lens through which to view this very real father-son tension. The legend's popularity soared in the 19th and 20th centuries, a time when India was under British rule, the story became a symbol of defiance against unjust authority. Anarkali's tragic fate resonated with a population feeling the weight of colonial oppression. She became a figure of heroic resistance, a woman who chose love and dignity even in the face of certain death. She is the ultimate underdog, and her story is a timeless tale of the individual versus the state. This is why it has been so endlessly adaptable in literature and cinema. Each generation reinterprets the story to reflect its own anxieties and aspirations. Mughalism, for instance, elevated the story into a grand national epic, emphasizing themes of secularism and the unity of India through the love between a Muslim prince and a woman who is often depicted as Hindu. In the end, it doesn't really matter if Anarkali was a real person. The legend of Anarkali has taken on a life of its own, becoming a powerful piece of cultural mythology. It tells us less about the specific events of Akbar's court and more about the values, conflicts, and dreams of the people who have told her story for centuries. It speaks to the universal human desire for love to conquer all, even the might of an empire. The story holds a mirror up to the Mughal world, reflecting its grandeur, its cruelty, and its very human heart. Anarkali may be a ghost from a historical perspective, but in the cultural imagination of South Asia, she is immortal. What do you think? Do you believe Anarkali was real, or is her story more powerful as a myth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into history and legend, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more. See you next time. So why does her story endure? Why do we keep returning to this tale of a woman who may never have existed, dying in a way that may never have happened, for a love that may be entirely fictional? Because the story gives form to experiences that are universal. The experience of loving someone you cannot have. The experience of being destroyed by forces beyond your control. The experience of watching power crush what you value most and being unable to stop it. The experience of choosing dignity in impossible circumstances, even when dignity changes nothing. These are human experiences that transcend time and geography. They happened in Mughal India. They happen now. They will happen in the future. Anarkali's story survives because it speaks to these universal experiences of powerlessness and loss. But the story also survives because it offers something romance and legend add, but history does not hope. The belief that love matters even when it fails. That resistance has value even when it accomplishes nothing. That choosing how you die when you cannot choose whether you die is its own form of victory. That being remembered is a form of immortality, even if the memory is imperfect, romanticized, transformed by centuries of retelling. In a world where power seems absolute and individuals seem irrelevant, the story of someone who said no to empire and paid with her life offers a strange comfort. Not because the outcome was good, it was terrible, but because the refusal itself was real. Stand in Lahore one final time. Evening light falls across the building that may or may not be Anarkali's tomb. Office workers exit the civil secretariat carrying briefcases, planning dinner, thinking about ordinary concerns. The building that witnessed extraordinary suffering is now backdrop to ordinary life. This is how time works. Horror becomes history, becomes architecture, becomes office space. The screams fade. The names are forgotten. The systems that cause the suffering are replaced by different systems that cause different suffering. Everything changes and nothing changes. But tonight, like every night for 4 centuries, someone, somewhere is telling Anarkali's story. A grandmother in Lahore to her granddaughter. A teacher in Delhi to students studying Mughal history. A filmmaker in Mumbai developing a new adaptation. A couple in love, afraid of forces trying to separate them, finding courage in a legend about someone who loved despite impossible odds. The story moves through time, changing with each telling, accumulating meanings its original participants never intended. Anarkali becomes whatever we need her to be: victim, heroine, symbol, warning, inspiration, and perhaps that is enough. Perhaps immortality through story, even imperfect story, even romanticized story that obscures as much as it reveals, is the only immortality available to those who lived and died without power. Anarkali has no verified grave, no confirmed existence, no historical record that definitively proves she was real. But she has this, for centuries of people who refuse to forget her, who speak her name, who argue about her meaning, who bring flowers to a building that may or may not hold her remains, who tell her story to daughters and lovers and anyone who will listen. That is what remains after empire falls, not the monuments emperors built to themselves, not the territories they conquered, not the dynasties they established. Those fade, crumble, get repurposed into filing cabinets and tourist attractions. What remains are the stories of people who suffered under those emperors, loved despite those systems, died resisting those structures. Imperfect stories, contested stories, but stories that refuse to be sealed behind brick, that refuse to suffocate in darkness, that refuse to be erased no matter how many centuries pass. Remember Anarkali. Remember what Akbar built in that courtyard, a tomb to demonstrate absolute power. A warning written in brick and mortar, a machine designed to break his son by destroying what his son loved. Remember how completely that power failed. The tomb crumbled, the empire collapsed, the dynasty ended. But the woman they tried to erase is still here, for centuries later, still loved, still mourned, still refusing to be forgotten. That is not victory. She still died screaming in darkness, if she died at all. But it is something. A refusal to let power have the final word. An insistence that love matters even when it fails to save. A whisper across centuries that says, she existed, she loved, she suffered, and we remember. This is what Anarkali's story means. Not romance, not tragedy, not legend. Just the stubborn persistence of memory against the machinery of erasure. Just the human refusal to let power write the only history. Just the belief that even those without power deserve to be remembered, that their suffering matters, that their love was real even if it changed nothing, that their deaths should not be the end of their stories. In remembering Anarkali, we resist what Akbar tried to accomplish. We undo the tomb. We break open the walls. We let her breathe again, if only in our collective imagination, if only in the stories we cannot stop telling.